We have to go, now.
What is it? What's wrong?
No time, I'll explain on the way.
Coffee spilled across the linoleum, a muddy brown puddle inching toward Chanel's tires. Nobody noticed. They were too busy staring at the giant of a man in the doorway and the scarred Belgian Malinois at his hip. A dog that was about to break every rule in the room. Fluorescent lights hummed above, emitting a sickly, greenish hue that made the hospital cafeteria look like a morgue with a salad bar. Chanel sat in the far back corner. It was her designated spot, not by official decree but by the unspoken social contract of able-bodied people who didn't know where to look when they saw a 30-year-old woman in a titanium wheelchair. She liked the corner. Her back was flush against the cold cinder-block wall. She had a clear view of the double doors. More importantly, it kept the pity miles away. She peeled apart her turkey sandwich. The bread felt like damp cardboard and smelled vaguely of industrial bleach, effectively masking the scent of boiled carrots lingering from the hot food line. Chanel took a bite, chewed mechanically, and dug her knuckles into the numb expanse of her right thigh. 4 years since the drunk driver. 4 years of people tilting their heads, softening their voices, treating her like cracked glass that had been glued back together. It exhausted her. She didn't want inspiration. She wanted a decent meal in silence. Rain lashed against the large plate-glass windows. A Tuesday in November. Miserable, bone-chilling weather. The double doors of the cafeteria shoved open, letting in a gust of freezing wind and the sharp scent of wet asphalt. Chanel didn't look up at first. She was busy scraping a layer of unidentifiable mayonnaise off her meat. But a sudden, unnatural dip in the ambient noise forced her attention. The usual clatter of cheap metal forks against ceramic plates faltered. The squeak of rubber-soled nursing shoes stopped. A man stood in the entryway. He dripped water onto the grey linoleum. He didn't look like a patient, nor did he look like a doctor. He looked like a localized storm front. Tall, broad-shouldered, but hunched inward, instinctively guarding his center mass. He wore a faded olive-drab jacket, soaked through at the shoulders, clinging to him like a second skin. Water beaded in his dark, closely cropped hair. His eyes, pale, restless, exhausted, flicked across the room in a jagged, mechanical rhythm. Threat assessment. Chanel knew the look. She worked in the VA recovery wing 2 floors up. This guy was fresh out of something dark, and the jagged red scar cutting through his left eyebrow confirmed it. At his left side stood a dog, not a golden retriever in a cute, brightly colored vest. This was a Belgian Malinois, lean, corded with dense muscle, wrapped in a black tactical harness loaded with utility pouches and a heavy-duty grab handle. The dog's coat was a wet, dark fawn. A thick, raised strip of hairless skin disrupted the fur along its ribs. Shrapnel, Chanel guessed. The animal stood perfectly still, eyes locked forward, leaning slightly against the man's leg. Chanel watched him walk. His gait was uneven, favoring his right leg, a heavy, punishing limp that ground his heel into the floorboards. He moved toward the coffee station. The crowd parted for him. It wasn't out of respect. It was out of primal, uncomfortable instinct. The man radiated a tense, coiled energy, like a snapped power line whipping around on wet concrete. He poured a black coffee. No sugar, no milk. He didn't even bother to grab a plastic lid. He just took the steaming paper cup and turned around. His eyes locked onto Chanel's corner. She stiffened, her hand freezing halfway to her mouth with the ruined sandwich. There were at least a dozen empty tables. Tables near the windows, tables near the entrance, tables far away from the cynical nurse whose legs didn't work. He walked straight toward her. The heavy rubber soles of his boots squeaked against the wet floor. The Malinois moved in lockstep, its nails clicking. Tick, tick, tick. a rhythmic metronome of military discipline. As he got closer, the sensory details hit Chanel in waves. He smelled of rain-soaked wool, burnt coffee, and the distinctly metallic, sour tang of old adrenaline. Up close, his face was worse than she initially thought. Greyish skin drawn too tight over sharp cheekbones. Deep, bruised shadows under his eyes, hollowed out by days, maybe weeks of sleeplessness. He stopped at her table. Chanel stared at him. She didn't offer a polite, accommodating smile. She was completely out of smiles. She gripped the cold aluminum push rims of her chair, bracing herself. She hated the invasion of her perimeter. She resented his assumption that he could just claim her space. Yet the clinical part of her brain, the nurse, noted the pale nail beds on his free hand and the slight, involuntary tremor in his jaw. "Can I sit here?" His voice was gravelly, low. It barely carried over the hum of the vending machines. Chanel frowned. She looked at the perfectly good, empty tables to her left. She looked back at him. "There's a whole room, buddy." "I know." He didn't explain. He didn't offer a sad, apologetic story or a charming grin to disarm her. He just stood there, holding his coffee, his knuckles white around the flimsy paper cup. His eyes darted to the window, then back to the space behind Chanel's head, the solid cinder block wall. He needed the wall at his back. He needed to see the exits. He was trapped in a war zone that didn't exist here. Chanel swallowed her irritation. Her jaw unclenched. She recognized a fellow ghost when she saw one. "Fine," she muttered, shifting her plastic tray a few inches to the right. "Knock yourself out." He pulled out the chair opposite her. It scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh, grating sound that made Chanel wince. He sat down heavily. A ragged breath escaped him, barely audible, slipping out through gritted teeth. He placed his coffee on the table. "Down," he whispered. It wasn't a command yelled across a park. It was a micro-vibration in the air. The Malinois immediately folded its hind legs, preparing to slide under the small table. Standard protocol. Out of sight, out of the way. But that wasn't what happened. The cafeteria retained its muted, strained atmosphere. People at adjacent tables pretended to eat, stealing covert glances at the giant, battered man and the dangerous-looking dog. Chanel went back to her sandwich, determined to ignore the heavy, suffocating presence across from her. She picked at the crust, feeling the crumbly, dry texture against her thumb. Underneath the table, a sudden shift in weight vibrated through the floorboards. Chanel's titanium footplates rattled. She pulled her knees back instinctively, though she couldn't feel the physical movement below her waist. The heavy scrape of dog claws against linoleum echoed from beneath the plastic tabletop. "Brutus, stay!" The man hissed. His voice held a sudden, sharp edge of panic. The dog ignored him. A large, wedge-shaped head emerged from under the table, but not on the man's side. Brutus stepped out into the narrow aisle separating Chanel's table from the next. The dog didn't sit. He didn't lie down. He stood squarely in the open space, his broad chest blocking the walkway completely. An orderly pushing a cart of dirty trays stopped dead in his tracks. The cart wheels squeaked in loud protest. Excuse me," the orderly mumbled, staring nervously at the animal. Brutus didn't look at the orderly. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed entirely on Chanel. "Hey!" the man barked, reaching down to grab the short, braided handle on the dog's tactical vest. "Brutus, heel." The dog planted his paws. He dropped his center of gravity, turning himself into 70 pounds of immovable muscle and bone. The heavy leather leash went taut. The man pulled. His jaw clenched, a fresh bead of sweat breaking out on his forehead. The knuckles on his scarred hand turned stark white. Chanel watched, her heart hammering a sudden, erratic rhythm against her ribs. She wasn't afraid of dogs, but this animal was a weapon. She could see the scars. She could see the sheer explosive power coiled in its hindquarters. "What is he doing?" Chanel asked, her voice tight. She kept her hands flat on the table, hyper-aware of her own vulnerability. He doesn't do this!" the man stammered. The cool, hyper-vigilant operator from 2 minutes ago was fracturing right in front of her. His breath hitched. He pulled harder on the harness. "Brutus, what's wrong with you? Heel!" Instead of retreating, Brutus took one step closer to Chanel. The cafeteria went dead silent. The hum of the vending machine compressor seemed to amplify in the quiet. The orderly with the tray cart slowly backed away. Every eye in the room pivoted to the corner. The silence was thick, heavy, and deeply uncomfortable. Chanel hated it. She hated being the center of attention. Her cheeks burned with a sudden flush of angry heat. She was the paralyzed girl again, the spectacle. "Get him under control!" Chanel snapped, her cynical shell hardening to protect her. She didn't want a scene. She didn't want an audience of pitying eyes. "I'm trying!" the man growled through gritted teeth. His hand shook. A violent, uncontrollable tremor ran down his forearm. He wasn't just struggling with the dog. He was struggling with his own crumbling nervous system. The caffeine, the adrenaline, the sheer exhaustion. It was all culminating in this tiny public rebellion. He's trained. He's a Tier 1. He doesn't disobey. Brutus took another step. He was now flush against the side of Chanel's wheelchair. Chanel recoiled, pressing her spine hard against the vinyl backrest. The dog was massive. Up close, he smelled of damp earth, wet canvas, and crushed pine needles. Heat radiated from his dark fur, a furnace of living, breathing intensity right against her skin. Then Brutus did the unthinkable. He didn't sniff her. He didn't lick her hand. He lowered his massive, scarred head, bypassed the metal armrest of her chair, and laid his chin directly across Chanel's paralyzed thighs. The impact was heavy. It pressed down on her legs with the weight of an anvil. Even through the neurological dead zone, the deep, phantom nerve endings in Chanel's spine registered the sudden, immense pressure. A strange buzzing sensation, like static on an old television, spread across her lap. "No, no, no!" the man gasped. He dropped his coffee. It tipped over, spilling a dark, steaming puddle across the table, dripping off the edge and splashing onto his boots. He didn't care. He scrambled out of his chair, dropping heavily to one knee beside the dog. "Brutus, off! The forgotten hallway, she didn't feel like a prop. She felt seen. "My spine got crushed 4 years ago," Chanel said. The words tasted like old pennies, familiar and bitter. A guy in a Silverado had 5 beers at a Tuesday afternoon tailgate and ran a red light. T-boned my sedan at 60 miles an hour. Thaxton didn't offer a sympathetic grimace. He didn't tilt his head and say, "I'm so sorry." He just listened, his pale eyes locked onto her face, absorbing the facts with the grim acceptance of a man who understood random, senseless violence. "For the first 2 years, I hated everyone who could walk," Chanel admitted, the truth bleeding out in the quiet corridor. She surprised herself with the confession. She never talked about this. Not to a therapist, not to her colleagues. "I hated the doctors. I hated the physical therapists. I hated the people who looked at me like I was a tragedy. I just wanted to disappear into the wall." She looked down at Brutus. The dog opened one brown eye, looking up at her lazily before closing it again, perfectly content in the silence. "But you don't get to disappear," Chanel said, her voice hardening slightly. "You have to wake up every day, hoist yourself into a metal chair, and drag yourself through a world that isn't built for you anymore. You don't get to quit just because the parameters of the mission changed." Thaxton stared at her. The words hit him with the precision of a sniper's bullet. The parameters of the mission changed. He looked at his shaking hands. He looked at his ruined knee. He looked at the dog that was supposed to fix him, but was just as broken as he was. "How do you do it?" he asked, the question raw and desperate. "How do you just accept it?" Chanel gripped her wheels. The cold metal grounded her. "You don't," she said flatly. "Acceptance is a myth they sell you in group therapy. You don't accept it. You just figure out how to carry it. You find things that are heavier than the grief, and you anchor yourself to them." She nodded down at the massive, sleeping dog between them. "Brutus gets it," she added, a faint, cynical smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. "When the floor drops out, you don't panic. You find a 70-pound anchor, you drop your weight, and you wait for the storm to pass." Thaxton looked from the dog, up to Chanel. For the first time since he walked into the cafeteria, the jagged, frantic energy completely drained out of his frame. The defensive posture relaxed. He pushed himself off the window ledge, his bad knee protesting with a dull ache, and carefully lowered himself to sit on the dusty floor right next to Brutus. He crossed his legs, leaning his broad back against the wall, putting himself at eye level with Chanel's footplates. He rested a large, calloused hand on the dog's flank. Brutus sighed, shifting his weight to lean firmly against Thaxton's thigh, while keeping his front paws securely resting against Chanel's chair. Connected. Grounded. "I'm Thaxton," he said, holding his free hand out toward her. It was still bruised, the knuckles scarred, but the violent tremor had finally ceased. Chanel looked at the offered hand. It wasn't a gesture of pity. It was a bridge built across a terrifying expanse of shared trauma. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around his rough, warm palm. The grip was firm, solid, and deeply human. "Chanel," she replied. Outside, the November rain continued to batter the frosted glass, a relentless, freezing downpour. But inside the sterile, dusty corridor, the air felt a fraction warmer. The deafening roar of the world had quieted, reduced to the steady, rhythmic breathing of a scarred K9 and the quiet solidarity of two people who had finally stopped trying to survive alone. What did you think of Chanel and Thaxton's unexpected encounter? Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves are brought down by the quiet intuition of a loyal friend. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder of human connection, and subscribe to our channel for more deep, emotional stories. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where an animal knew exactly what you needed?
Hi everyone, today I want to talk about indoor plants. This one is a pothos. It's so easy to care for. It purifies the air and adds life to any room. I highly recommend getting one for your home.